Hi everyone, this is Jim. This is a game I played recently in the Grunfeld. It was a blitz game, and I thought, well, I wasn't recording at the time, so it's not a live game, but I thought it was pretty instructive. So I thought it'd be interesting to show it to you and talk about some of the themes of the Grunfeld defense, which I've been trying to learn recently. Now, it's not a big theoretical discussion. My opponent diverges from the main line quite quickly, but we see very typical Grunfeld themes emerging anyway. So let's get on with the game. He starts with d4. I play knight f6, and he plays c4. So now I play g6, which can introduce either the Grunfeld or the King's Indian, and possibly other lines as well, but those are the main ideas. g6. He goes knight c3 to prepare the move e4. And now this is the dividing line. You can continue with other lines by going bishop g7, or you can play the Grunfeld with d5. And you have to play it right here on move 3, otherwise white will get on the move e4 and you're forever, well, pretty much prevented from playing that. You can try and build up with c6, I suppose. Go into kind of a Slav setup. Okay, so anyway, he takes, and that's the main line here. And in fact, that's the way I play it as well. The other very popular choice is knight f3. It's not, that was a bad arrow. Knight f3. It's not quite as challenging as the c takes d5 setup. This is the move. This move is really challenging the Grunfeld and saying, you know, show me, basically. And that's the way I play it as white. So he takes, I take back, and the idea of that c takes d5 is to throw in the move e4 right away, kick that knight out of the center, and this knight doesn't have anywhere great to go. If it just goes back where it came from, or if it comes over here to b6, black has basically just given up the center for nothing at all. So the idea here with the Grunfeld is to take this knight and to weaken white's queenside a little bit. So white has this big, impressive center, but black has one move in development. He's gained a move in development because he's got the first piece developed. And then secondly, this structure over here looks impressive, but it turns out to be a bit fragile, and black goes about counterattacking it pretty quickly. As well as black gets this great bishop along this diagonal. It can generate lots of tactical threats. So that's the compensation that black has for giving up the center. Now the main moves, my opponent, you can see, played queen c2, and we're just out of the opening book after that. The main moves here, just to briefly discuss the main ideas, are knight f3 and bishop c4. And the way I play it is with this bishop c4 move. You bring the bishop out here, you bring the knight to e2. I saw this in a game, Topolov Anand, I think, and just seemed like a nice, simple way to develop. The knight sits here on e2. You develop the bishop first, so the knight can occupy the c2 square. It supports these pawns over here, and f3 can be played, so there's no pin to worry about. But it turns out that pin is not really such a great problem anyway, and the main move is really even more popular than that bishop c4 move is the move knight to f3. And the knight just comes out here. We'll show a couple moves of the main line here. Knight f3, c5, counterattacking the center. Rook to b1 has a dual purpose of getting the rook off of this diagonal so that these pawns can be exchanged or moved forward, and also putting the rook on a nice open file. Black castles, bishop to e2, and now there's different ways to play from here. I usually go with the knight c6 idea, just getting more pieces out and piling up the pressure, but you can also take at this point or play b6. So that's just a little bit of the main line. Let's get back to the game. In the game right here, after I played bishop g7, he went queen c2, and we're just out of the opening book. And at first the chess engine isn't sure about this move, but yeah, if you let it think for a while, it gives white the typical kind of opening advantage. So it's not like this move is a mistake. It's just white's getting out of the book. Maybe it's not the sharpest line or the most challenging line, but well, we'll see how the game goes. I continue with c5. Typical Grunfeld move, counterattacking the center. And notice I'm never afraid of pawn takes c5. I mean, it just loses a pawn there. Now maybe I could get it back with queen to a5 possibly, but even if I couldn't, it leaves white with this horrible pawn structure. So it's generally no big deal to lose the c5 pawn. He goes bishop e3, supporting his center against the idea of taking, I guess. I go knight c6, piling up on the center, and he decides to push forward with d5. at this point. And you see that's actually the top choice and a common idea for white. In the Grunfeld, white will secure this c3 pawn first with a piece. A lot of times it's with knight e2 securing c3. And then it's safe to push this d pawn forward and maybe dislodge black's pieces. But in this case, I've got a nice square to go to with e5. And now black can just grab that pawn, and he does. So what's interesting about this is that I've lost a pawn, and I haven't gotten any pawn damage on white's queen side in exchange. White's pawns are perfectly fine. They're just a little bit far advanced is the only potential defect. And yet the engine, if you look at the evaluation here, it says that it's still about even with only a slight edge to white. So that means that black really has massive compensation for the pawn, and it really helps to understand this to be a Grunfeld player. Basically what you've got is a lot of piece activity. The queen can come out here, the bishop is already on a great diagonal, and also the rook comes to the c file. You can pile up on c3 here. White's queen side is all exposed here, and the pawns, although they're not they're not doubled or anything, they're a bit disorganized, and also his pieces on the king side are not yet developed. So all of this adds up to adequate compensation for the pawn. You just need to play actively with black, and you will get a good game. So I start by castling, which is a good move. He goes f3. Maybe not the best response, but it's kind of logical. It keeps my bishop from landing on any of these squares on the queen side. And really the problem with f3 is the move f5. I can just sort of counterattack in the center with f5. And I didn't do that, so neither of us are going to be playing the absolute best moves here in a blitz game, but just keep that idea in mind that this move f5 not only counterattacks the center, but also gives this bishop on c8 something to do. So that's a good move. Instead, let's see, an alternative would be queen c7. That's also a good move. I played knight d7, so didn't really take advantage of his f3 move, and now white's back to having that typical opening advantage. He just drops his bishop back, and I play b6. I'm trying to open up a line for my light squared bishop to get into the game. He goes rook to d1, and yeah, maintaining that advantage for white. I go queen c7. But also, this kind of advantage for white is nothing you should be worried about as a Grunfeld player. It's sort of like when you play the King's Indian. The engine will tell you you have a terrible position until all of a sudden you're winning. And that can happen in this opening as well. So queen c7 is a good place for the queen, targeting this c3 pawn. He goes bishop d4. At this point, he decides to... Yeah, actually, it's one of the top choices here. It's kind of interesting that moving that bishop 3 times, but well, the knight's out of the way now, so bishop d4 immediately challenging my my strong Grunfeld bishop, and I can't really do much about it. So I decide to proceed with developing the rest of my pieces. I push this a pawn forward, so I have a square to bring the bishop out. I didn't think it had much future here on b5, and so I think I'm going to play bishop a6. And let's see, he pushes on with c4. Yeah, so let's back up just one move. So right here, I think this is the point where white had the biggest advantage. So the way that white could continue to play, let's look at this takes line. That's probably the simplest. He takes for white to get the biggest edge, and we'll take a look at this position. Because I didn't play the most active moves possible, so I didn't quite get all I could out of the Grunfeld here. And then he follows it up with queen d2 or bishop to b5. And he starts getting these pieces out on the king side. That's the important point. And let's see, I would probably play bishop a6 here. Yeah, that's one of the moves. That's not too far off. He takes, take, and then what's the follow-up? Knight e2. And white in this line is slowly unwinding and getting his pieces out. And eventually, he's just going to be a pawn up. So that's why it's important to play actively with black. So so my play here was not the most accurate. As well. So in this move, instead of a5, knight to c5 or bishop takes d4 are the engine ideas, and then I keep in this range. Okay, so I played a5. He went c4 here, and this is where white really makes his mistakes. And one problem is that he's always trying to support the c pawn. He could just give that pawn back in many lines and and in exchange for getting his pieces developed, and he would be okay. Let's see, I go with bishop a6. Now that c-pawn is a target for this bishop, and at this point he decides to exchange out and play rook to c1. So once again, holding on to his c-pawn. Let's see, I go rook a to c8, piling up on it. It's still kind of a backwards pawn and a bit of a target, and he goes g3. So this is interesting. It's kind of a nice idea. I was planning to play this move, knight to e5, to put more pressure here, but the knight on e5 would just get pinned along this diagonal. I didn't want to allow that, so I dropped my king back first to get it off that diagonal, and that gives white time to play f4. So that secures his c-pawn. It keeps my knight from coming into here and attacking, but it has created a few more weaknesses. He's pushed some more pawns forward, and I target the c-pawn here, and now this next move is really his big mistake. At this point I've only got a slight edge, but e5, just continuing to push on with the pawns, possibly intending to get an attack going against my king, but this pushing on in the center is not really helping him, and he's giving back the pawn. So let's back up. What's the move here? Yeah, the move here is to develop his pieces and give back the pawn. So knight to e2 or bishop to h3, and I can just grab this pawn, and material would be even, and white would be in the game still. So e5, and I take this pawn anyway, and now this is a dangerous passed pawn here. He goes bishop h3, finally getting his kingside pieces out. And I push on with c3, which opens up this line for the bishop and prevents him from castling. So I have a pretty secure advantage here. Yeah, I was going to say, the engine at first likes the move knight e2, but after it looks a little bit deeper, turns out that doesn't help either. So he plays knight f3, but basically nothing is working at this point after that push. It's all downhill. Let's see, I could immediately hop on this dark squared diagonal with either queen to c5 or queen to b6. Those are the top two choices. So I kind of waste a move here with rook f to d8, but still keeping that edge. And he goes f5 here, and now I hit on the idea, and I hop in with queen c5. Would have been just as strong in the previous move. And now we see another kind of problem that occurs when white pushes his pawns forward. The pawns themselves become weak and are subject to counterattack, but also they leave holes in white's position behind them when they come forward. So now this is just a fatal situation with all of my pieces looking at that empty space. He tries knight h4. Basically he's going for counterattack. The knight's looking at these light squares, coordinating with the bishop and the queen, but it's just a little too slow. I come in here with the immediate check. Yes, and the chess engine already spots a mate and 8, and it's just downhill from here. The check, and he can't block the check because the bishop is guarding those squares. The only real move to stay in the game is king d1, and then I can take this e5 pawn to get my knight into the attack. He goes bishop g2, which actually is the putting up the toughest fight here. Let's say I go queen d4, check, and if he doesn't want to give away more material, he goes here, which is also giving up the longest fight, putting up the biggest struggle. Go knight d3, check, and then he went king back to d1. And it doesn't matter where the king goes, he's basically losing the queen, because on any square that he can go to, this knight will move with check. If he goes to either of those light squares, or if he goes over here, well, he can't go to that one. But he went here, but the knight still moves with check, and that means he loses the queen. So he resigned at this point, but there's actually a mate in 4. Anyway, losing the queen is probably good enough. So a nice little finish to that game, and I thought showing some pretty typical ideas in the Grunfeld. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.